Joined by Mads Gilbert. He's the head of the Emergency Medicine Department at the University Hospital of North Norway, and he's live from us from Amman in Jordan. Mads, thank you very much indeed for joining us. You'll have heard Israel reiterating again today, the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reiterating that no fuel will be allowed into Gaza until all hostages have been released. And I suppose it's fair to say that fuel is perhaps the most critical of all those supplies that are needed.
I think the most critical supply actually now is water, because without water we die, and without water children very quickly become dehydrated, and with the heat and with the infections, with fever, I'm very concerned about the child population in Gaza. We hear that they are actually putting sugar into seawater and try to drink that, which is by itself very dangerous. But I agree with you, water, fuel, food, and medical supplies. But most of all, the bombing must stop, because the bombing is killing and injuring people all the time. And that has to stop, because we know that the Palestinian healthcare system is breaking down because of lack of capacity, lack of fuel, lack of food and water. So this is an imminent, colossal disaster. And I wonder, when I hear the reports, I wonder what kind of government is doing this. I mean, this is complete terror against a whole population. Collective punishment, starving people, killing people, thirsting people to death.
Sure, and I mentioned fuel, Mads, because of course it powers the water desalination plants to provide fresh drinking water, but also allows hospitals to operate effectively. That clearly has broken down. The World Health Organization suggesting now there was a severe danger of the rapid spread of infectious disease. How much of a threat is that to the civilian population?
Oh, it's a huge threat. You're absolutely right. And we know from the overcrowded hospitals where 122,000 internally displaced Palestinians have been taken refuge. In Shifa alone, there are around 50,000 refugees. And of course, they need water for their personal hygiene to drink. And there is already a dramatic spread of infectious diseases, skin diseases, and of course, the gastrointestinal, diarrhea, vomit, fever. And we know that the wounds of the wounded are being infected with flies. The burns in the children, when they dress them, they find maggots in the wounds, not because it's a bad healthcare, but it's a healthcare that is denied all the basic commodities that you need to run a healthcare system. My colleagues in Gaza are first-class nurses and doctors. The surgery is very good, but when you don't have electricity, you don't have water, you don't have drugs, and you don't have the medical supplies, you cannot run it. And they had to turn off the sterilizing machines for the surgical equipment 2 days ago. They had to turn out the oxygen machines, which is making oxygen from the air, and they also had to turn off the cooling system for the morgue where the dead bodies are. So this is very dramatic, and as the day passes by, it's getting worse and worse. And I wonder, when is the world going to stop this? Because this is horrendous. I haven't seen anything like this from history books since the medieval times.
It's a concerning situation, of course. We've heard that there's only a trickle of aid being allowed into Gaza, nowhere near enough. The amount of trucks that would have normally gone in daily would be in the hundreds. I also wanted to ask you about the trickle of civilians leaving Gaza, those crossing the Rafah crossing into Egypt. I understand you've been involved with the setting up of hospitals on that side of the border in Egypt. I mean, how many civilians are your hospitals there receiving, and how many more are you expecting?
Well, I'm not directly involved in that, but I have experience with the evacuation from Gaza during ongoing bombing. It's very difficult. We saw the ambulances that were leaving a few days ago with accepted patients actually to Egypt, and coordinated with Egyptians, were rocketed and twice when they were trying to leave, and then when they came back to Shifa, horrible scenes. So to be realistic, there is currently no evacuation ongoing through Rafah of injured. The foreigners with foreign passports are getting out in some few numbers. And of course, as you said, the incoming relief is but a trickle. Normally, Gaza needs 400 to 500 truckloads per day to sustain life. Now we have 4 weeks of backlog. We have a backlog of at least 10,000 truckloads. And this is also in contradiction to international law because the relief is supposed to be controlled by the UN and international agencies. Now the relief is controlled by Israel, and they do not want to allow any relief in, but for this symbolic trickle of supplies. And even yesterday, the Israelis attacked also the ICRC relief columns coming up to Gaza City. So it's a horrible scene because it's breaking all the rules of protection of the civilian population. And it seems like only calling something Hamas is making it a legal target. We have to remember that the government, the de facto government in Gaza, has a military part and a civilian part. And the civilian part has been running Gaza for the better part of 15 years. They've been running the healthcare, they've been running education, communication, water pipelines, everything that a society needs. And you cannot start bombing that just because you have defined the military wing a target of your military operations. So again, there is loads of breaches of international law, all supported by the United States and with the fabled clapping of the European governments. This has to stop.
Great to talk to you today, Mads, albeit in appalling circumstances. We really thank you for coming on the programme, Dr. Mads Gilbert there.